there are a lot of political problems in Ireland at the moment. There is a lack of housing. There's a lack of medical care. Our schools are underfunded. The class sizes are too big. The cost of living is going up. But the people who are responsible for all of that are not the immigrants or the refugees from Ukraine. It is the Irish politicians who have fucked it up. Gaelic words, like if you want to know that group in the 50s name, you can take a stab at pronouncing it. Like,
oh god!
Hey, I did my best a minute ago, and I'm happy to try again. I've got no shame.
Go for it.
Yeah, I have the feeling that like every time I look at like Gaelic words, that it's kind of the inverse of what we're used to with Slavic languages, where we see big clusters of consonants, and here there's lots of clusters of vowels, and I'm just like,
we don't even pronounce some of them.
Yeah, I noticed that.
But anyway, we'll discuss linguistics some other time. Let's get into the fascists.
Yes, absolutely.
All right.
Welcome to The Empire Never Ended with Boris, Fritz, and Ray.
Yo. Hi.
And we are joined by a new friend to the show. God damn it, I knew I would choke when it came down to it. And that is...
we just went through this, Fritz, come on.
Pádraig Óg Ó Ruairc. I know how to say it.
Thank you. Yep.
Welcome to the show. Pádraig reached out to us to offer us some help in framing the recent riots in Dublin that we mentioned in the last episode. He happens to be a very accomplished author. And has written, God damn, I pulled it up just now, but have you written 7 books already?
I think I'm on 8 or 9.
Good Lord,
7
man.
are yeah, I know, I need a hobby. 7 are in print. The 8th is coming out in February, and the 9th one is the one I'm going to be talking to you guys about, which is a history of fascism and the far right in Ireland. So I have an academic background. I have a PhD in modern Irish history, but I mainly specialize in like the Irish Revolution. So our, struggle for independence against Britain and social change at the time. And that takes in labor history and women's history and kind of global imperialism and how the Irish relate to, Indian colonialism and African and so on. But during more recent years, seeing trouble and political change in Ireland, and we just had all our centenaries for that big revolutionary era, I kind of said, okay, nobody has written about these crazy fascists and Nazi sympathizers and religious eccentrics in Ireland. So I was like, I guess I'm sad enough to be reading and watching their crap online. Who better to do it than me?
Yeah. Again, we told you this before the show, but we do sympathize with that struggle.
Yeah.
Also, I felt a bit vindicated reading some of your work here on these fascists, that I feel like you would also sympathize with us and perhaps back up our constant claim that I swear to everyone, we're not looking for pedophiles, right? We're looking for fascists. but there's just a lot lot of them, right? And I mean, I'm reading your book here. I felt like, Potter gets us. He understands the struggle.
Yeah, you have also poisoned and rotted your brains by having to read all this stuff.
That's absolutely true. 100%.
Solidarity.
Welcome to the compound. Yeah.
Delighted to be here.
Yeah, thanks a lot for being here. Also, interesting day too, as far as like celebrity deaths go. I mean, we had Kissinger pop off, but also we had Shane McGowan of the Pogues died today.
I have the feeling Shane McGowan went first and said, "While we're going, can we take Kissinger with us?"
I think you're right. Yeah, he's waiting for him up there with a fucking IED or something.
He was. McGowan was a lyrical genius, brilliant songwriter, but I met him once and at a gig, and he was very much the worse for wear for drink. And
Sure.
oh no, it was terrible. It was one of the worst gigs I was ever at. And he wasn't even singing Pogue stuff. He started going into this Irish rebel song stuff, which, despite my Irish Republican politics, I really hate the rebel songs and stuff. And somebody threw him up a balaclava on stage to wear as like a prop. And he tried to put it on, but he was so drunk he couldn't find the eye holes, and he fell over backwards into the drum kit. Jesus Christ. Then he couldn't remember the words of the song, so his mother had to get up and sing it with him. And then afterwards, I asked him for an autograph, and he told me to fuck off. But then eventually he decided.
Well, all right. I'd say it's a fitting tribute to the guy, actually. Yeah.
In fairness, he does mention like Frank Ryan and Irish Republican anti-fascists in his music, so we'll give him that. I won't hold him against him.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, we only speak ill of the dead in the case of Kissinger today.
Yeah. Okay. Well, no, there's a few other people on the list today that we're going to be speaking ill of.
Yes.
I mean, let's be honest.
Yeah. No, okay, fair enough. I meant the recently deceased. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Well, all right. Well, let's get into why you're here today, Pádraig, why you reached out to us, and what went down in Dublin. So about a week ago, as our listeners would know, an anti-immigrant riot broke out following the news of stabbings in Dublin. And we saw racist protesters calling for a reckoning against immigrants even before the full details of the crime were released. And a bunch of people took to the streets to burn a bunch of shit down, apparently in an act of vengeance against a state that was insufficiently racist for their tastes. And I've seen a lot of media coverage on this, most of it framed either in terms of like, well, in the terms of the racist kind of rioting position, which would be, well, this is what happens when people get immigranted so hard. Like, what do you expect? This is a product of bad immigration policy. And on the other side, I've also seen press and politicians use the riot as a call for more advanced policing techniques, crackdowns on misinformation and that kind of thing. But as I was reading this chapter that you sent us, I read a kind of a different story here where fascism in Ireland is not something necessarily new, not at all, actually, and neither is it like some organic popular response to policy failures. And its history with the police, on top of that, has not really been characterized by how like the Gardaí would kind of seem today, which is like calling for more technologically advanced policing things, as though they're trying to desperately keep up with something that's new for them. In fact, historically, as I think your writing has shown, the police sort of put up their hands and let this shit happen. I mean, it's been going on for a long time. They've been very disinterested in it. And please tell us a little more, I guess, about what went down in Dublin.
So what happened in Dublin, it's an area called Parnell Square. It's right off O'Connell Street, which is the city's main thoroughfare on the north side of Dublin. It's actually an area that has a lot of immigration. There would be, Chinese and Afro-Caribbean shops there. They would be, right side by side with Irish shops. You'd have a lot of Nigerian shops and families there. You'd have historically a small Vietnamese community in the area as well. And I used to live in Dublin, so I know the actual school where this happened. It's Gaelscoil Mhuire. And a Gaelscoil is an Irish language school. So it's taught through the Irish Gaelic language rather than English. And Gaelic is obviously a very minority indigenous language here. And what happened was on Thursday the 23rd of November, about lunchtime, a man armed with a knife attacked I think 3 school children and the teacher who was caring for them. Now, this didn't happen in the school. It seemed to happen outside on the street. And very quickly, the attack was stopped by, firstly, the bravery of the teacher, who basically put herself between the children and the attacker, although several of the children had been stabbed at that stage. Yeah. And then a Brazilian Deliveroo driver was riding by on his moped and saw what was happening, and he got off and he took off his helmet and started beating the shit out of the attacker with the helmet. And then you also had like a French chef who was working nearby, and he came out and he intervened and actually got the knife out of the guy's hand. It's important to say that attacks like this are unprecedented in Ireland. We never had something like, we don't have school shootings here. Guns, firearms are extremely rare. We don't have random attacks like this. We've never had an Islamist attack, and there is no suggestion that this was Islamist or terrorist linked. And the current situation is that I think one of the children has been released from hospital. The carer and one of the girls in particular is still in critical care. And obviously, the whole nation is kind of hoping that, they pull through. It's worth saying that the girl who's most seriously injured, it's been reported in the press that her mother is an Eastern European immigrant and her father is a South American immigrant. So this was the child of immigrants, but was attending the Gael school, was attending the Irish language school. And that again shows you how well, in most cases, immigrants are and asylum seekers are integrated into Irish society. I mean, I know a woman in Cork where I live, she's Ukrainian and she's fluent Irish. But very quickly, the An Garda Síochána, the Gardaí, the Irish police force came in, cordoned this off as a crime scene. The victims were taken to hospital. The alleged attacker was arrested. And it's interesting, actually, that a group of women who were on the street formed up around him, and there was a mob forming to come and basically kill him. And the women encircled the attacker and said, no, we're not savages. This isn't how we do things. Because some of these women, again, were American tourists who on and said, or some of the people in the mob were American tourists who on. They said, no, this isn't how we do things here. We're not savages. The police are going to take care of this. He's down. He's not attacking anyone. So the police came, arrested the guy. Victims were taken to hospital. I think the attacker had injured himself in the process as well and was taken away. But the far right immediately took to social media and said that all kinds of things. They said this was an Islamist attack. Before the attacker's identity was even confirmed, they said that this was a refugee or an immigrant. Of course, they didn't know that at the time, but they happened to be right in this case. They, of course, never, didn't report that the girl who was injured, was also from a refugee immigrant background. Didn't mention the fact that it was, somebody, a Brazilian guy and a French guy, both foreigners, who stopped this attack. And Irish people are very grateful to them. Like, there was a GoFundMe set up for the Brazilian guy to buy him a pint. And I think there's about €200,000 or €300,000 in that GoFundMe now. So
damn. Is beer that expensive in Ireland right now?
No, but I don't think the guy is going to have to put his hand. He's not going to have to pay for a beer for a while.
Yeah, hell yeah.
What happened was that the far right and the kind of citizen journalist types and the conspiracy theorists immediately took to Twitter, immediately took to social media and started live streaming and said, get into Dublin, get into town. This has gone too far. They're attacking our children. It's time to fight back. And these guys frame themselves as the defenders of women and children. And it's interesting that, just to tell you about for some context, some recent murder cases, there was a Filipino woman in her early 20s who was murdered about 2 or 3 years back by a middle-aged Irish guy who was high in cocaine, and he just abducted her, murdered her, and then he got shot dead by the cops. Far right said nothing about it. There was a Mongolian woman who was working in Dublin City as a cleaner, within a kilometre of where this recent attack happened. She was stabbed to death by an Irish teenager. Again, far right, the so-called defenders of women say nothing about this. But more recently, you had a case where there was a young Irish school teacher called Aisling Murphy, and in the Irish Midlands, she was stabbed and killed. Just a completely random attack by this guy, Joseph Puška, who was I think a Slovenian immigrant. And that has generated, understandably, a lot of anger and people are saying, well, who was this guy? He shouldn't even have been in Ireland. And this guy had no criminal record, but obviously, was a deranged murderer. But Conor McGregor, who you mentioned in particular, was tweeting about that, was complaining about the fact, and again, I'm not on Twitter, I'm just going by what I've read in the press, but seemed to be complaining about the fact that people from overseas have voting rights in Irish elections. They do, but only in like local government elections and in European elections. So they can't vote unless you're an Irish citizen on who makes up the Dáil, our parliament, our government, and you can't vote on a referendum, anything that affects the constitution. But
I mean, that's true in most of the EU, no? Like,
that's true in most of the EU. And the deal with being in the EU is, if you're, we would have voting rights for local elections, European elections, if we went to Germany, Poland, wherever. But Conor McGregor, in response to not the attack, but my understanding is in response to a tweet about the voting rights, said Ireland is at war, and he's been tweeting quite a lot, it seems, about the Ashling Murphy case. Now, you, of course, in America are dealing with the First Amendment rights. I am dealing with the Ireland's 2009 Defamation Act. Think Irving versus Libstat. So I'm sure, in fairness to Conor McGregor, if one can use such a statement, Conor McGregor has said that he doesn't condone the rioting that happened. But he has said that there are dangerous problems in Ireland and they need to be solved. And he seems to be complaining a lot about immigration and suggesting that immigration is the cause of this violence, rather than we don't even know the motive. Was there a mental health issue thing? We don't know what. But so McGregor's comments have been picked up by Tucker Carlson. And have been picked up by who's that guy? Steve Bannon was on with him as well.
Oh yeah.
Were they asking if he should run for president or something? They were like, "Could Conor McGregor leave the country?"
I doubt it very much. McGregor frames himself as he's getting a lot of criticism in the press here. Now, it should be said, he's very popular. He's a very successful sports star. I think a lot of young people look up to him. Personally, I'm not really into the guy, but I think it's very interesting that he frames himself as an Irish patriot when he's doing this. And Conor McGregor has appeared on the BBC wearing a poppy, the symbol of remembrance for British Army dead, which is not a popular thing to do in Ireland. He got a lot of hassle for it. Despite attending a Gael school himself, an Irish-speaking school when he was young, he can't actually speak the language, which again, if you're going to call yourself an Irish patriot, you might, make the effort to speak the language.
He didn't become a historian, you know what I mean? He just he attacks people for a living.
He chose to get hit in the head many times instead. Yeah,
it shows.
But moving on anyway. Conor himself was kind of using his platform at the time, it seems. And again, I temper this by saying I'm not on Twitter myself. I've only seen the reported tweets back. But other people, Conor was not himself saying, go out and rioting, we need to fight back. But other people, those who would be not sports stars, but those on the far right, those who would be citizen journalists and so on, they basically have... were encouraging people to go in that night and to fight back, as they put it. And immediately there was trouble from when they arrived. The far right basically started chanting anti-immigrant slogans, overrun the police cordon, potentially contaminated the crime scene as the investigation was happening. And what you have is that the police in Ireland have so far taken, and we can discuss this more in a minute if you want, but have so far taken what's called soft touch approach to these guys. They're not going in hard and heavy on them. They're kind of saying, oh, we don't want to use our batons on them because if we're seen to be, beating these guys up and force them off the streets, they'll play the martyr card. That has always been the police strategy. And it blew up spectacularly last Thursday.
Sorry, just worth mentioning perhaps that has not been true of the anti-fascists historically, as I understand it.
No. What I would say is that, for example, I'm talking to you from Cork, but I'm from County Clare originally. And like in County Clare, we had anti-immigrant protesters in at McGowan House at Inch, a place in Clare I'm very familiar with. And they basically, the police let them set up roadblocks and stop the buses coming in and interrogate people driving by and stopping their cars and saying, you know, who are you and where are you going to and all this kind of stuff, you know. And the police stood back and did nothing as, you know, citizens just took over the roads. Whereas I remember being at protests. County Clare is a large airport, Shannon Airport. The US military uses it for flights to Iraq and Afghanistan. And there have been anti-war and left-wing protests there. And suddenly the police were arriving with, you know, with canine units, with the riot squad, with armed police, which is unusual in Ireland, with SWAT teams, with helicopters, with special political detectives, you know, and there was no shortage of police resources when they were policing left-wing protesters in Clare. When it was right-wing protesters in Clare, it was very much stand back. But what happened in Dublin was the police again took this soft touch approach. You had hundreds, possibly thousands of people began rioting. And basically, I think there's tens of millions of pounds worth of damage done to shops in the O'Connell Street area. Funnily enough, the main bookshop in the street, Eason's, was untouched. So they just looted. People began looting like sports goods and all this kind of stuff. There were 3 buses, 1 tram set on fire. There were 11 police vehicles damaged, 3 of which were burnt out. And it should be said that the rioting initially was sparked by anti-immigrant sentiment. But very quickly what you saw, and I was watching it being live streamed at the time by so-called citizen journalists on the right, very quickly you had people who just wanted basically to take part in a riot for recreational purposes or to go out and steal sports goods started getting involved. And it's funny because people went into sports shops and stole pairs of shoes and then left their old trainers on the sidewalk. And of course, the police came along the next day and went, DNA evidence. Perfect.
It was a trade. We traded.
Yeah. For about 4 hours, the city centre of our capital city was a no-go area. All public transport was closed. Bus drivers from immigrant backgrounds were attacked. Now, it should be said as well that it began as a far-right event, spiralled out of control, and by the end of the night, people who were taking part weren't far-right. For example, during the live stream, some of the far-right protesters were giving out that immigrants were also taking part in the looting, and some of the people who've been named, now a majority seem to be Irish, but some of the people who were arrested have names like, Pavel Kowalski. And if there is a Pavel Kowalski who's been arrested, I'm not defaming you. I'm just using that as like a John Smith, Joe Bloggs, John Doe. But guys with like Polish and Lithuanian names have been arrested as well. So this suggests that they took advantage of the free for all. So that's what happened in Dublin on Thursday night. And now there are calls for both the Minister for Justice, Helen McEntee, and the Commissioner of An Garda Síochána, our police commissioner, Drew Harris, to resign as a result. But so far, the government is backing them up.
Okay. But I guess on the front of the feeling that it's erupted out of nowhere or it was a sudden organic reaction, I think it's time to turn to the fascist history of Ireland here.
Okay.
And maybe
I was going to say, just to say in that post-World War II, Ireland has been very lucky in having a very, very small far-right because traditionally, if you were a nationalist, it was a civic nationalism, or as we call it, Irish republicanism. You would tend to vote for and support political parties like Sinn Féin, and they would have had international ties with the African National Congress, would be selling posters of Nelson Mandela, would be supporters of the Palestinian cause, and basically you didn't have the kind of soccer hooliganism that you had in England that would channel into the far right. Here, Gaelic games were very popular, and Irish soccer supporters tended to be very left-wing and working-class guys as well. And really, we didn't have a huge problem with the far right. We didn't really have many immigrants coming to Ireland until the late 1990s, early 2000s. It was always more Ireland was exporting people, though you would have had, Indian, Pakistani families here. You would have had, as I said, a small Vietnamese community in Dublin and various very small Chinese communities around the city. And of course, historically, then you'd have had Jewish immigration fleeing Tsarist Russia and stuff going way back. But what happened was, as people started arriving from Nigeria, from Iraq, Afghanistan in the early 2000s, you had attempts to set up a far right and far right feeling. Now, since 1991, we've had a group here, Anti-Fascist Action Ireland, and they have been very successful in monitoring and basically taking these guys on in the streets. And really, you didn't see the far right getting organised that much. Come up to 2015, and you had Pegida. You familiar with those guys?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So Pegida, the started in Germany, this anti-Islamist group, spread over to England. Tommy Robinson and people were involved in that. They attempted to set up an Irish branch, and they wanted to meet at the GPO, which is the General Post Office, where this famous rebellion against the British had happened 100 years before. And on the day that they called their planned rally, Tommy Robinson, of course, didn't show up, and neither did the fascists, because there were 5,000 anti-fascists there on the streets waiting for them. And you're talking about people from Irish language groups, you're talking about people from Irish Republican groups, trade unionist groups, LGBT groups, Muslim communities were there, and we're all just going, come on. And basically there were a few scuffles in that day, but Pegida never got to hold their rally, weren't heard of again. But things got really problematic around 2018, 2019. So you're talking then about the Syrian migrant crisis kind of biting in. And we had a downturn in the economy. There weren't many houses being built, and suddenly people seemed to be competing for housing and accommodation and stuff. And because of the downturn, you had closed hotels. These were being converted into migrant or refugee centres. And any time that there was word got out that a hotel was going to be used anywhere around Ireland for a migration centre, in a lot of cases, these hotels, now many of them are being used, but in a lot of cases, these hotels will be attacked in arson attacks, will be burnt down. Wow. And of course, the police haven't solved any of these. And my fear in looking at that is looking what happened to Turkish migrants in Germany in the late 80s, early 90s, that sooner or later, these far-right lunatics are going to set fire to a hotel or a migrant centre that has people in it. Also, Sinn Féin TD in County Leitrim, a TD is a member of Parliament, came out and condemned these and said, look, I don't care if it costs me votes, this is racist, this is not how we do things in Ireland. And his house was attacked and his car was petrol bombed, I think more than once, and he had to move house as a result. And then, of course, you had the pandemic coming on top of it. And what this seemed to do was this kind of galvanized all the different groups. You had the anti-vaxxers, you had the 5G conspiracy theorists, you had, the trad Catholics, and then the anti-immigrant hardcore racists and the closet neo-Nazis and the Holocaust deniers all started getting together.
So you're saying the American-Irish relationship remains strong.
Well, at the moment, one of the things the far right is doing here is attacking libraries for drag queen story hours. We don't even have drag queen story hours in our libraries, but they're seeing what you're doing with they're seeing what you're doing with school book bannings, and they're trying to do the same here. But what happened was, during the pandemic, Ireland had a very tight lockdown. Because our health system was under pressure before this even happened. And the conspiracy theorists, everyone was locked up. I mean, when the lockdown here started, you couldn't go more than 2 kilometres beyond your house, and then it was extended to 5 kilometres and so on. So the conspiracy theorists immediately said, oh, this is a big plan. Of course, we know who's behind it. It's the New World Order and such nonsense. And basically, you started seeing the stickers going up. You started seeing them mobilizing on the street. And again, when there were trade unionists on strike, which had begun before the pandemic, because, you know, workers have been put out of their jobs in places like Cleary's and Debenhams in Dublin, the police were moving on to trade unionists, saying you're breaking, you know, healthcare pandemic rules, and we're leaving the far right largely alone. And this culminated in at the end of the pandemic in around March of 2021, just before March, just before St. Patrick's Day, when there was all sorts of crazy groups. There was born again Christians. There was like the Irish faction of the Proud Boys were there. There was like these minority far right parties, and they were trying to hold a rally. The police said, no, you're not allowed to hold a rally. And they started attacking the police with glass bottles, with fireworks. And basically, one police officer was nearly killed. There was a firework shot straight at his face. The guy who did that has been caught and imprisoned. But basically, I knew from then, I was like, these guys are dangerous. You know, they're getting violent. This is only a matter of time.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is, Ireland has kind of flown under the radar for the exact reasons that you said. Everybody kind of associates Ireland with, you know, this kind of anti-imperialist history and the like. And so, I mean, I think when this most recent riot happened, I think a lot of people were taken by surprise. And, you know, I think, like you said, with like the tradition of like football hooligans, you know, I was reading in like I think it was BBC or something, that there was a presence of football hooligans. And I was like, do they have right-wing ultras in Ireland? I didn't even really know there were very many. Like,
no, we don't. I have to admit, like, I'm not really on the soccer scene. Like I am helping train like a junior sports team, and it's hurling and it's Gaelic football, which are two indigenous Gaelic sports. And like,
there's no fascist hurling club. That, you know. No. Some people would say Kilkenny, but that's just because they don't like their hurling. No, politically there isn't, and. I mean, the GAA, like the Gaelic Athletic Association, they've been very good on this, because they're a voluntary national organisation, and their slogan is the GAA, where we all belong. And they've been emphasising, you know, that this is a game for everyone. And like, I'm in rural Cork, in a very small village, and like I have a kid from the Czech Republic who's playing hurling on the team. I have a kid who is from Ukraine, who's here as a refugee, who's playing hurling on the team. There was another kid who was involved who was from an Indian background as well. So certainly in terms of sporting, it hasn't really taken off. And now there has been some abuse of, like, there's a very good Gaelic footballer from Wexford, Lee Chin, and he has taken some racist abuse, but I think they've identified the guy who did that. And there were other guys like Satanto O'Halpine, who, again, fluent Irish speaker, one of the most, as you guessed from the name, one of the most amazing hurlers of his age. But I think I think one of his parents is from, I'd have to get it right. Is from an immigrant background anyway, and his mother is from an immigrant background. His father is Gaelic, and I think he's taken some abuse and stuff as well. But basically, on the sports scene here, no, we don't have that kind of far right thing. I mean, just the fact that when we're talking about racist abuse against a player, when you follow it up with, I think they got the guy that did that. That says a lot, you know.
Yeah, I mean, there would be like there's a goalkeeper, Donald Cusack, for Cork again, who would have been an excellent goalkeeper and top level, and he was getting abuse because he was gay. But he came out and he spoke about that. And in fairness to the GAA, I think they've done very well on that. Again, their slogan is the GAA, where we all belong. But I don't know too much about sports, so let's go back to the fascists.
Hey, all right. Yeah. You were just reading a sentence that was in my brain just then. I'm very moved. I was like, I thought this guy's a nerd. What's happening here?
Well, we've come very close to having a terrorist attack in Dublin.
I was going to ask you, about this time about Mark Wolf, right?
Yeah. So one thing that's very strange about the emerging Irish far right scene is how much the British far right is involved in stoking it and in promoting it. And, people like Nick Griffin, people like, who's the guy in Britain first, Paul Golding, were retweeting stuff that was coming out. And it's a very strange thing that these guys who were real British imperialists and who going back in the day would have been really anti-Irish are now kind of taking an interest in this. And some of their groups have attempted to set up Irish branches here as well. So you had this one guy who came over. So his name was Mark Wolfe. He was an Englishman who was living in Camden in London, and it wouldn't be a TENE podcast without a good neo-Nazi fascist. So this guy was hardcore neo-Nazi. Police raided his house, found a quarter, I should say, neo-Nazi fascist pedophile.
It's assumed.
Yeah, well, found a quarter of a million child abuse images on his computers.
Yeah,
so
that sounds right.
He got to Ireland, and he basically came to Ireland and started arming himself. And he was watching videos of the New Zealand 2019 Christchurch massacre attack, and he had previous convictions for assault, grievous bodily harm, and firearms offences. And again, firearms offences are much more serious in Britain or in Ireland than they would be in the States. Most of us do not have guns. And what this guy had was he had I think a firearm. He had replica police uniform, and he also had like gas masks and a Sonnenrad flag. So he seemed to be into like atom division stuff.
Oh yeah,
and it appears that he was planning an attack on a mosque in Dublin.
Yeah, that sounds like a planner.
Thankfully, he was caught before he could do anything, and he's currently serving a 10-year prison sentence.
And this is just, this happened, a month ago, this conviction?
He was convicted towards the start of the year, so it would have been maybe...
All right.
And again, there was very little in it about the Irish press. You would think
But this is a historic conviction, right? This is the first.
Yeah, so he was convicted there in, I think, the start of this year, 2023, but he was arrested, I think, in 2022.
But reading your book, I was surprised that there's an older history of this cooperation or attempts of cooperation between fascists from Ireland and the ones from Britain. And I'm not talking even about like the loyalist one. Of course, you would expect them that they have a British connection, but some who were Irish and had an Irish nationalist position, but still tried to or had contacts with fascists from Britain. So I read the chapter of your book that covers fascism and the far right in Ireland after the Second World War. So I'm remembering now there's a guy who in the 50s tried to have a connection with Arnold Lees, who's a guy that we mentioned on our podcast before because he was a mentor of Colin Jordan, who was the mentor of David Mamet.
Right, yes. Our mascot.
Yes. And he's a real, like, even for a Nazi, he was a nasty character. Like, he was a friend of, like, Julius Streicher from Germany, who was, like, the worst anti-Semite the Nazi party had. And then after that, he tried to have a contact with, like, Oswald Mosley even. So what's going on there? Why are these fascists who are, like, Irish nationalists having contacts with these people?
So, yeah, you get a lot of international connections. The Irish far-right scene is always small, and it seems their main thing is trying to get, finance or support from the far-right in Britain and in America. And, there are tenuous connections there, like Parker Yockey actually wrote his book Imperium here in Ireland, though he doesn't seem to have much connection with the Irish far right at the time. They would have been pretty small back then. There's this very weird character who is called Raymond Moulton Sean O'Brien. And despite the O'Brien name, he was born up in England. And he basically tried to say that he was like an Irish lord, that he was Prince of Thomond. So Thomond would be an area around Limerick historically, but like this is a republic. Okay. We don't do lords, So this guy was a complete fantasist, and he basically would print off these posters advertising, join the Black Legion, we are 10,000 strong and we are going to take over the country and rid ourselves of Jews and we will march and reclaim Northern Ireland and all this kind of stuff. And again, I think he attempted to make contacts with Leese and Mosley and people. Now, he was actually, again, another paedophile. He was actually arrested on multiple times in connection with child sexual offences, but he was only prosecuted for one. He did launch a very short-lived group called the United Christian Nationalist Party, and again, it promoted anti-Semitism and prized itself as being anti-communist and said it was only open to people who were of pure Irish blood. But again, in his case, the British far right didn't take much interest in him.
I think the guy that Ray was referring to was, and I've been practicing this name in particular, Pádraig Óg Ó Ruairc.
Oh, Garrod Ó Ruairc, yeah.
My God, I was so far off. Oh my God, I listened to I went to 3 different pronunciation websites and I picked the one that had the most stars and I used that.
Yeah, so Garrod Ó Ruairc is the guy who tries to resurrect Irish fascism post World War II.
Right.
He possibly is the world's first Holocaust denier.
That was interesting.
Yeah, because he is writing he basically, to start with him from the start, and I'll come back to the Holocaust denier thing, he was from Belfast. He was very interested in the Irish language and he moved to Dublin and joined the Irish Civil Service, where you have to have a degree of Gaelic because it's a government organisation and we have 2 official languages. And he was involved in a group called Conradh na Gaeilge. Now, Conradh na Gaeilge is not a fascist group. It's just like an Irish language group. There are people in it from the left, from the right, from all different backgrounds historically. In fact, the traditional minority community, Protestants from an Anglo-Irish background, were very involved in it. He was involved in that for a number of years, but the organisers of that became very kind of upset at. They said, okay, listen, you're very active and you're very interested in the Irish language, but you're really, you're bringing a lot of politics into this and we're a non-political organisation. So Quinnigan goes, fine, I'll set up my own organisation and I'm going to have a Gaelic-style Hitler Youth.
That is a perfectly rational response to asking a guy to be a little bit quieter about their politics in class. Yes.
So he goes off. He tells the civil service that he wants to go to the Gaeltacht, which is a traditional Gaelic-speaking area in Donegal in the west of Ireland, to learn Irish. They refuse to send him there, so he quits his civil service job as well and goes full-time into politics. And this is around the year 1942, 1943. And he sets up a group called Altri na Hasairige, which means the architects of or Altri na Hashairi, the architects of the resurrection. And basically,
sounds scary as fuck.
He is not just somebody who wants a fascist Ireland, he wants a Gaelic-speaking fascist Ireland. And he is really hardcore, and he's, mixing kind of, it's almost like a Christ the King Christian nationalism type of thing, where he's not talking about corporatism and stuff. He's talking about getting rid of the government and having a Ceanara, as he calls him. Ceanara is the Irish word for leader, who's going to run everything. And of course, he's envisioning himself in this role. And he basically wants, the country run according to Catholic canon law, and claims that this is going to make Ireland one of the most important nations in Europe, and it will eventually lead to the establishment of an Irish empire. So he's really a delusionist. Now,
let's not be modest here, right? It was like a 2,000-year Reich. I mean, he doubled up on Hitler.
That's it. 2,000 years. Yeah, he promised he would have a 2,000-year Reich. So he was going to outdo Hitler. He during World War II, he's hoping for the Nazis to invade Ireland, and his plan is, when they do, we will be the Nazi fifth column, and they will install me, Garrod Ó Ruairc, as their quisling. And this doesn't work, but he becomes kind of the first Holocaust denier, because there is public interest and curiosity in the group. They would do things like go out into the centre of Dublin and just stand up on the soapbox and just make these really impassioned speeches in Gaelic, which most of the people in the city couldn't understand a word of.
Sure.
And then after 5 minutes or so, when they had gathered a crowd, would break into English and start, explaining their politics and selling their newspaper. And their newspaper is called Asairi, which means resurrection. And it's in that newspaper in 1945 when the first cinema reels are being shown of the, Auschwitz and Birkenau and places that he basically comes out in the newspaper and says, these are fraudulent, do not believe them. This is something Hollywood has cooked up. So straight away in the first weeks of news breaking of this, he is denying the Holocaust. Now, they actually get a number of local councillors elected in like the early 1950s, but then there's a dispute over leadership, as there often is in these tiny fascist groups, and basically the group falls apart. They keep running their newspaper, I think, up until the 70s, and then the group completely disappears. Their deputy leader was stung to death by bees. He was, they were very much into like self-sufficiency and back to the land stuff. And they're very much into kind of an Irish Gaelic Ireland and self-sufficiently. So they said we need to set up our own factories and our own industries. So his deputy leader was like beekeeping, amateur beekeeping in the back garden. And something went wrong and the bees got inside his suit and stung him to death.
Shit.
Cue the Nicolas Cage clip.
Oh, no, not the bees! Not the bees! Ah! Out of my eyes!
Not the bees.
Yeah, that O'Brien guy that we talked about previously, the pedophile.
Yeah, he was the Black Legion,
Yeah, he wanted to be the king of Ireland, right?
Yeah. A lot of these guys have weird kind of...
which is like, maybe the most sensible way to be a monarchist. At least, he was the king. Like,
Right.
Makes more sense that the monarchists were not kings, at least in theory.
Yes.
Yeah, he was, I did actually see in Dublin recently a sticker for a group called the Irish Monarchist League. So I don't know if they're like a throwback to him, but we're kind of done with kings. I can't see that flying anytime soon.
No.
But the other guy I was going to say, we were talking about Holocaust denial and international links. You had stuff like the Institute for Historical Review.
Yes, our listeners should be very familiar with this.
So one of the founders of that was a guy called William McCaldon. He founded it with Willis Carto, and McCaldon was actually from Belfast, from a loyalist, a pro-British background, and he was a member of the British National Front. But shortly after joining the National Front, he moved to America, and then he set up in. I think he moved to Britain briefly and worked for like Oswald Mosley's at some stage. But he ended up in America and founded the Institute for Historical Review anyway. So
Ireland, huh? Cured leprosy, invented color photography, invented Holocaust denial. Complicated places.
Yeah. That's it.
A lot of ups and downs. Very interesting.
But imagine that, like, Ireland's position in World War II kind of lended itself to various different interpretations of what was going on in the European continent. No? I mean...
Well, you had, in World War II, you see, that's complicated by the fact that... I suppose it's similar maybe to what you might get in Eastern Europe, in Lithuania and places where some of their kind of great national heroes who fought for independence come World War II, then up taking the wrong side. Right. And in Ireland, what you had basically is the south of Ireland had just gotten partial independence from Britain 20 years earlier in a pretty bloody conflict. And then you had... we had 50,000 Irishmen killed in the First World War, an imperialist war. We had nothing to do with. So when World War II came along, there was a lot of anti-war feeling, and there was a lot of anti-British feeling still, because, 20 years earlier, the British Army had burnt down whole towns and murdered lots of people in Ireland. So people were going, are we really entering a war on the side of the British? So there was unanimity in the Irish National Parliament to stay out of that conflict. The Irish Taoiseach, or Prime Minister at the time, was Eamon de Valera, and basically he kept Ireland out of that conflict and pursued this policy of neutrality. And you had this very strange situation where if British airmen crashed in Ireland, they would be locked up and put in an internment camp in the Curragh. And if Nazi Luftwaffe guys crashed, they'd be locked up in the same place. And then in there as well were like the IRA, because the government were worried, the IRA could become a fifth column because they're so anti-British.
Right.
So you had all these different groups. And the controls were very lax because they kind of said, there's not a high possibility of these guys escaping. And a lot of the guys, particularly from the Luftwaffe, didn't want to go back to the war. So like every morning, the German and British officers would be allowed to, they would be paid by their embassies, because we were neutral, the embassies were still open. So they'd be paid their wages by the embassy, and they'd be issued their wages and told, okay, lads, you can go off downtown for a few pints or buy a meal in a restaurant. Wow. So just, they'd sign a piece of paper like gentleman's honor that they would come back.
Instead of going back to war. Yeah, I think it wasn't a hard sell.
You had these very weird stories about the local restaurant, and the Luftwaffe would be inside, and the British would walk in, and go, "Oh, sorry, chaps, we didn't know you were here. We'll carry on up the road." There's actually a movie about it. It's called The Brill Cream Boys, starring Gabriel Byrne. So that might be one for you to watch.
Wow. Yeah.
So in your book, you write also about this horrible guy called William McGrath, and he was a loyalist and I guess a Protestant preacher officially, and he founded this very weird organization called TARA, which is like an extremist, I guess, kind of connected to paramilitaries, or in some way also a paramilitary organization. In the 60s, I think he founded it. But he was specific also because he was a supporter of like British Israelism, which is a weird ideology that we did a whole episode on.
Yeah.
And which is like, okay, so these are the people who believe that in some version Anglo-Saxons were actually descendants of ancient Israelites, in some other version all Germanic peoples, which this McGrath guy is neither of these things. So I don't know how that works. But I know a little bit. He had some idea how Ireland was actually a home of some more ancient Celtic form of Christianity that he wanted to resurrect somehow. So I guess in some way he actually wasn't a Protestant because he believed in some superior form of Christianity that's older than that. So I don't know, maybe you can tell us. And of course, in addition to all of this, he was also a pedophile.
Can we just let's just do this.
Given, I think at this point, we have to specify when they're not pedophiles.
I mean, but this one was like one of the worst because, this McGrath is like a really disgusting guy because he actually like molested children.
There's even worse than that has come out recently. So on British Israelism or Anglo-Israelism in Ireland, it has a pretty long history going back to the early 1900s. And what you've got is the stone that the King or Queen of England is inaugurated on comes from Scotland, and it's called the Stone of Scone, but it's known in Gaelic Irish, and in Scottish Gaelic folklore, there is An Lia Fáil, or the Stone of Destiny. And this is supposed to be, it's not the one, I'm going to say it as a proud Irishman, it's not the one the Brits have. Right? This thing is mythical, it's lost in time, but when the true king stands on it, back when we had chieftains and tribes, it was supposed to roar. So this thing was in Scotland, and in medieval times, people were trying to explain it. It was one of these type of inauguration stones. And somebody said, this is the pillow of Jacob from which he dreamed Jacob's ladder, and that Scotland comes from Scotia, which is the Pharaoh's daughter, and she brought her to Scotland.
Yes, this is British Israelism. Absolutely. Dan made Denmark.
Yeah.
Yes.
So they claim that the name Scotland comes from Scotia and all this, and it's complete nonsense. It's popular in kind of royalist, monarchist, loyalist, pro-British, pro-monarchy circles in Scotland, and obviously when you have Scottish immigration or the Scottish plantation or British plantation of the north of Ireland, Northern Ireland, the loyalists there don't see themselves as English. They see themselves as British, In some cases, they see themselves as Northern Irish as well, but they also see themselves as being, quote, Ulster Scots, is how they describe themselves. Right. And you have, in the early 1900s, you have British Israelism becomes popular in some loyalist circles in Ireland, and a group of these British Israelites decide from some weird old text they read that the Ark of the Covenant, wait for this, Indiana Jones fans, is not hidden off somewhere in the Middle East. It's actually in Tara, the hill of Tara, which is this ancient Celtic ceremonial and kingship site just about an hour north of Dublin. In 1909, this group of absolute lunatic British Israelites just arrive with shovels, dozens of them, and just start digging up this ancient monument looking for the Ark of the Covenant. And like Irish nationalists go there and protest against them, saying, what are you doing? You're ruining this ancient site. And there's all kinds of protests and things about it. And I'm an archaeologist as well by training, and there was huge damage done. And then in 1919, you've Princess Alice, who was the Countess of Athlone, and she founds the British Israel World Foundation with the assistance of a guy called Reuben Sawyer, who was the Grand Wizard of the Oregon Clavern of the Ku Klux Klan. So in, let's say, Ulster Unionism, Protestant loyalism in Northern Ireland, you have some of them are into like creationism, and some of them, not a majority, this is not a majority view, but that strain is there, are into British Israelism. So that's the background. And along comes this guy, William McGrath, in the 1960s, and he is a preacher. He's a preacher in Belfast. He has his own Protestant evangelical church. He's really into British Israelism. He's doing things like sneaking behind the Iron Curtain and delivering Bibles to people. Nice. And from that, he gets his first contacts with the British intelligence services. And in the 1960s, as the violence is kicking off in Northern Ireland in the late 1960s, he forms his own loyalist paramilitary group, and he calls it Tara. And the reason why he calls it Tara is after this belief of the Ark of the Covenant and British Israelites. He's trying to express that connection. And he works closely with other terrorist groups like the Ulster Volunteer Force. And he is also involved in running boys' home for orphan boys called or I think for boys who are, it's kind of like a legal punishment thing like juvie. And he calls that home King Cora, the King Cora boys' home. And again, King Cora is a place from ancient Gaelic Irish history. So all the time he's stressing that British Israeli link. And he is also, get your TENE Pod bingo cards out, not only is he a neo-Nazi and a paedophile, he is also a British intelligence agent. So
I got bingo. I got it. I actually got it. So I never won before.
He's working for the feds, and there's another guy who he's involved with as well called John McKeague. John McKeague ran a group called the Red Hand Commando. I can talk about all these people now because they're dead. They can't sue me. But John McKeague ran the Red Hand Commando. And he was a sex offender who was abusing these boys. So was William McGrath. They were basically allowed to get away with what they were doing because they were informing to the authorities. One victim of the one boy who was abused at the home has said that Lord Louis Mountbatten, who was later assassinated by the IRA, he said that Mountbatten had actually abused him, had raped him twice at this home. And there's a great documentary out. I don't think it's got a general release yet. It was made for British television, but surprisingly, they decided not to broadcast it. So it's only been shown in a few independent cinemas here, and it's called The Lost Boys, Belfast's Missing Children. And it actually shows that this group, King Cora, and this group of loyalist Anglo-Israelites, 5 boys go missing, disappear in Belfast while this group is in operation. And it is suspected, and there's British government documentation that shows that this was being discussed at like cabinet level. It suggested that McKeag and McGrath may have involvement in these killings. 4 of those boys are still missing, presumed dead. The 5th boy, Brian McDermott, his body was found in a mutilated form, chopped up in a sack, thrown into the River Lagan in Belfast, and that crime has never been solved. So if you ever see that on Netflix, or if it comes out online, if it gets general release, The Lost Boys, Belfast Missing Children, that explores that group. Eventually, William McGrath is, there are people, to their credit, there are people in the British Army intelligence officers like Colin Wallace, find out about this and try and investigate it and try and expose what's happening. They're always shut down. Eventually, people succeed in getting William McGrath prosecuted, along with 2 other members of his group who were working at this home. But there have been attempts to organise like a historical investigation into the abuse that happened, but the British government has closed all files relating to the Kincora Boys home until 2065. So if you want to know the full details of it, Ray, you're going to have to hang around till then.
Damn.
Yeah. I had a follow-up question.
Oh, I should say, I came across one really weird Irish far-right YouTuber recently who has his own unique spin on the British Israelites. He's claiming it's not the Anglo-Saxons that are the true lost child tribes of Israel, that it's actually Celtic people who are Catholic. So the far right are putting a new spin on it. But sorry, Ray, I interrupted your question.
So in 1973, there was this very gruesome murder of a 10-year-old boy in Belfast.
Yeah, that's the Brian McDermott case.
So because it was so horrible, I think the media speculated that it was like some kind of a satanic ritual or something like that. So I think 2 things were alleged about this. One was that somehow it's connected with these people that we just mentioned, that the McKeag guy is behind it. Is one thing that was mentioned. And then the other thing is a claim by this British cop that you just mentioned, Wallace, who said that his job was basically to use this murder to stir up some kind of a satanic panic in the media, I think is what he alleged. Which is like there were not enough tensions, I guess, in Belfast for them. So they
the thinking of there's a great book on that called I don't know the author's name, but it's called Black Magic and Boogeymen. And it's basically what happened there. Colin Wallace was a British Army intelligence officer, but he was a native of Northern Ireland. So he knew the people very well. He was a really smart guy. He's still around. But he said that at the time of this murder, he had basically been instructed to stoke up fear to get people off the streets after curfew. And he basically said, look, Northern Ireland and Ireland is kind of an intensely religious society. If we can scare people and make them think that there is satanic stuff at work, then we will basically scare people to keep their kids indoors, and they won't be throwing rocks and petrol bombs at the British Army. That was the thinking behind it. And I think on one occasion, they set up like a fake satanic altar. On another occasion, there were like sheep, and then of course satanic panics take off. On another occasion, there were like sheep found dead, and everyone said, "Oh, this must have been a satanic ritual." And I think Colin Wallace's main job was like feeding stories to the press. He was a press officer as well, and just kind of seeding them and letting it grow. And for a time, there was a satanic panic, but there are other theories as well about that boy's murder, Brian McDermott's murder, but we can't go into them here. But I would recommend everyone watch the and that again is discussed in it, that Lost Boys documentary.
And I mean, this is interesting for us, or for me at least, because of this time period and the whole satanic thing connected with British intelligence, because we have this weird reoccurring character on our podcast, the English neo-Nazi David Mamet. And, so it seems that his group, or whatever it is, the Nazi Satanist Order of Nine Angles, was actually founded around the same time, or like in his head at least founded, in the early 70s. And we know that he actually, like, regardless of what we think how real the Order of Nine Angles is, he actually was a real neo-Nazi. Later on, a member of the Combat 18 group, and before that, other militant groups and so on. So it's the same kind of time period, and in his various autobiographies, which he's a pathological liar, so you can't really trust him, but I guess they also occasionally say something that's true. He mentions how he was traveling to Northern Ireland, and he's mysterious about what he was doing there. So I'm wondering, if there was any kind of him also allegedly working for British intelligence. Maybe that was the whole thing was.
I have never come across. I haven't read any of Myatt's stuff, and I feel pity for anyone like yourself who has.
No, don't read it.
I've never
brag.
I've never come across anything on the Irish far right scene, either from a kind of green Southern perspective or from a Northern Orange loyalist perspective, that has ever suggested anything like Order of Nine Angles to me. I think that guy Mark Wolf is probably the most extreme in that he was, obviously a paedophile, and he was into Sonnenrads and that kind of stuff.
He's
you did have like the National Front, the British National Party, and then you had a split off from them called the White Nationalist Party in the early 2000s in places like Belfast and Coleraine, and again in a loyalist areas. But no, Satanism has never really been a feature of it.
I was thinking more if, the Order of Nine Angles is like a fake satanic panic thing started by British intelligence at the same time when they were doing this shenanigans in the press in Northern Ireland. By the way, the book that you mentioned is Black Magic and Boogeyman, Fear, Rumor, and Popular Belief in North of Ireland, 1972-74. And the guy who wrote is Richard Jenkins, who's, I think, a professor.
Yeah, great book.
From Ireland.
Yeah.
Okay. You know why they didn't find the Ark of the Covenant on Tara, though, right?
Go on, tell me.
Well, I mean, it's in the Bosnian Pyramid of the Sun.
Clearly.
Of course, and that's where Novak Djokovic gets his tennis powers from.
That's exactly right. Yes. Historian, people. He knows. Well, I guess maybe while we're on that subject, we can go in a little bit more into, like some of our old favorites on the show, like Combat 18 and their integration into or their attempts to integrate into what was going on in Ireland in like fascist circles.
Okay. So in terms of Combat 18 and neo-Nazi groups like that in Britain, they do, as the conflict in the north of Ireland wears on from like the 1970s into the early 80s, it's the same time that the National Front is growing in prominence in Britain. And they do attempt to basically establish a presence in Northern Ireland. Now, sometimes, in fairness to members of the loyalist community, some of these guys were World War II veterans and just went, nah, fuck that. Like, I fought against Nazis in Europe. I don't want you in my community. But they do manage to get a foothold. And at one stage, the National Front actually had a bookshop and an office in Belfast. And basically, you have a number of loyalist paramilitary organizations like the Ulster Volunteer Force, or UVF, and the Ulster Defence Association, like the UDA. Those two in particular have flirted from time to time with the British far right. Now, it's usually for the purposes of getting finance or for the purpose of getting weaponry. And I think a number of guys from in the early 70s, a number of guys, I think one was even a conservative, a member of the British Conservative Party, were arrested for supplying weapons to Northern Ireland. Another guy, the other two guys, I think were National Front types. The UDA, the Ulster Defence Association, had kind of close connections with Combat 18. And again, it was for the supply of for guns to Northern Ireland. Also, you had the they had published their magazines and newsletters, and these would be sold at like National Front and British National Party rallies in London. And the money then would come back to them. I suppose the most extreme, and it's funny because you still actually, there have been as recently as 2015, 2016 swastika flags going up in Belfast. Like there's this kind of battle of the flags between the Green Republicans who see themselves as Irish and want Irish unification and to break away from Britain, and you've got the Orange Loyalists who want to maintain the link with Britain, and of course the Republicans put up the Irish flag and the Loyalists put up the British flag, and then we start taking sides in conflicts like what's happening in Israel and Gaza at the moment.
Right.
But like when Republicans in solidarity with the Palestinians would put up the Palestinian flag, suddenly you would have the Loyalists put up the Israeli flag. And you've had some very strange scenes then where the Israeli flag is flying in Belfast and the National Front guys come over and go, what the fuck is that doing up there, you know? But also around the time of the 12th of July, which is a big loyalist celebration, there have been instances where swastika flags, Combat 18 flags, and particularly SS flags and stuff have gone up on flagpoles in Northern Ireland near these bonfires and right beside loyalist murals. And in fairness, again, there have been people in the loyalist community who've gone, no, we reject that. And even when the White Nationalist Party set up in Belfast, David Irving's Progressive Unionist Party, which would be the most liberal or sympathetic to the left of loyalist or unionist parties, they went around and started tearing down their stickers, propaganda and stuff. But yeah, you do have that connection there. And I suppose it's at its most evident in, like if we go back to the Dublin violence we were talking about, people interviewing me during the week were asking me for parallels. And I could only think of two. One was in 1904, the so-called Limerick boycott or Limerick pogrom, when a Redemptorist preacher, this Catholic priest, stirs up a group of people in Limerick in a sermon, and they go out and start smashing up Jewish shops and tell people to boycott their businesses. And the Jewish community in Limerick would have been very small, but it got even smaller, 5 families left because of this intimidation.
Shit.
That's 1904. And then what you got is... come up to 1990s, I'm not sure, was it 1992 or 1994, there was an Ireland versus England soccer friendly in Lansdowne Road, and it was, I think, about 20 minutes into the match, and Ireland went up 1-0 with a goal, and the English fans just went absolutely nuts and started tearing up the seating and throwing it onto the pitch and throwing missiles. And amongst that crowd were neo-Nazis and hardcore loyalists. They abused, black players on the Irish team. They also abused the Irish manager, Jack Charlton, calling him a traitor. Jack Charlton was a very famous soccer player. He was an Englishman, but he was the Irish manager at that time. But he was a big trade unionist and also a very vocal anti-fascist. And he was a founding member of the Anti-Nazi League in England. So they really had it in for that guy. And the match had to be called off after another 20 minutes of rioting. And the English soccer fans tried to break in and fight with the Irish soccer fans. The police had to take out their batons and clear. They didn't mind using their batons on the far right when it was English far right guys. They're just shy about using it on the homegrown variety. But when the stadium was cleared, there was neo-Nazi graffiti, there was Combat 18 graffiti, there was loyalist literature found. Now, Nick Lowe's in Hope Not Hate in England has done a lot of research on this, and he's kind of skeptical of to what extent it was an organised thing by Combat 18 or just it happened organically with neo-Nazis, and Combat 18 were keen to kind of capitalise on it afterwards for street cred.
And famously, that incident was always interesting to me because UEFA banned any matches between England and Ireland for like 20 years or something. Like it was only very recently that they played again. And that was always funny to me because they always pair up ex-Yugoslav teams, so there's riots all the time. And like a year after the war, they have, Croatia, Serbia, Bosnia, this kind of thing. And, they had a 20-year gap between England, Ireland because of violence in the stands. It always perplexed me, but like, yeah, I mean, it was pretty bad.
I think it's happened since without incident, but we still like to, just because of old animosities, like be it the Eurovision Song Contest or be it soccer or rugby, anything else, just like we don't want the fucking English to win. England to World Cup final. Most Irish people are just like, nah, I'll shout for anyone England are playing. But that's not just Irish people. The Scottish.
No, I was going to say no one wants England to win Eurovision. No one. They're not the favorites. As a diehard follower. This is where
we revert to some sort of kind of really elementary anti-imperialism on this show, is like right. Anything regarding the English, I think.
Yeah. Go on. Tell me more about the English. Let's. Yeah.
Well, I actually one of my booklets is that I put out, not one of the full books, but I did a book called Deserters, Defectors, and Diehards, and it was about all of the English and British guys who were killed fighting for Irish independence during the Irish Revolution. Mm-hmm. One of them is a really interesting character called Arthur Weeks, who was an English trade unionist. He was a waiter, and he led the London waiters' strike of 1911. Nice. And he couldn't get any work afterwards. He was blacklisted. So he came to Ireland and he began working as a waiter under an alias. But he was also a member of the Industrial Workers of the World Union. Uh-huh. And he came over, and when the 1916 Irish Rebellion, the 1916 Rising happens against British rule, he turns up at the rebel headquarters and goes, "I'm here to fight for you." And they're like, "What the fuck is an Englishman doing here?" Like, we don't want you. And he said, "I'm in Ireland because I reject to being conscripted to fight for an imperialist war. But I'm here with you because I also object to fighting, or to being left out of a fight against imperialists." And he goes into the GPO, this centre of the headquarters. He fights there for the week against the British Crown Forces, while Irishmen in British uniform are outside shooting in at him. And he's wounded on like the last day of the rebellion fatally, and he dies. And it's really interesting to me that you have guys like him, an English Protestant trade unionist, absolutely no connection to Ireland, who take part in the Irish Revolution and pay with their lives. And there's other guys. There's Peter Monaghan from Scotland. There's who else is there? There's Reginald Hathaway, Walter Stennings from Oxford in England. There's Ian Mackenzie Kennedy from Scotland again. So in fairness, there always have been people on the left in England who have always supported Ireland. But I mentioned actually there the Industrial Workers of the World. One of their founding members was James Connolly, who was one of the leaders of that rebellion. Yep. And he himself was from an immigrant background. His parents were Irish immigrants in Scotland. He came back over. And a lot of the time when Irish Republicans, like the imagery of the 1916 Rising and these guys who signed the proclamation, like our Declaration of Independence, they're as revered here and as important here in Irish politics as the founding fathers are in American politics. But the problem for the far-right guys who tried to capitalize on him is that James Connolly was like a really ardent Marxist and socialist.
I've heard him described as the Marx of Ireland many times.
Yeah, that's one description for him. But even like the leader of that rebellion, Patrick Pearse, he was the son of an English Unitarian turned atheist, and Pearse used to say stuff like, "Remember, if you're ever free, it's the son of an Englishman who has freed you." And James Connolly himself said stuff, emphasized his own experience as an immigrant in the United States and places where he had worked. And he used to say stuff like, "Irishmen, beware of throwing rocks at immigrants because you might hit one of your brothers,"
Amen.
And we've always kind of, when Irish Republicans and anti-fascists try to challenge the propaganda of the far right in Ireland today, we're always emphasizing that, look, immigrants have come here, they've immigrated, they've contributed to our struggles for independence. It's not as simple as you guys are making out.
Yeah. I've noticed another pretty effective tactic on the side of anti-fascists in Ireland, which is to just beat the living shit out of Nazis pretty much wherever they show up. There's some interesting stories in this chapter. I was thinking specifically about the poor National Socialist Workers Party in their attempt to support apartheid.
Yeah, so there's a few different groups who turn up in the, and again, we're jumping around a lot here now.
We're just
try to situate this again now into some sort of timeline.
Yeah.
It's like jazz.
But what you, going right back like to the 1920s, one of the first fascist groups that sets up here is the British Fascisti. They're a really weird group. They work a program on their own. Their most famous member is William Joyce, Lord Haw Haw, who is actually born or lives in Ireland. It's unclear where he was born. But anyway, some of the members of that group, the British Fascisti, were regularly beaten up and knifed by members of the IRA and had their headquarters burnt down. And even when Oswald Mosley lived in Ireland after his political career ended, his home mysteriously caught fire, and it was later claimed by the IRA that they had done it. So who knows? But yeah, this guy, Terry Burns, now, I got to couch this by saying I'm not sure if he's still alive. I heard he died in the 1980s, so we'll just be careful about what I say about him. But he used his name publicly.
So just a message then, like, Terry, if you're out there, we're just funning around.
Hit us up.
We're just funning around. If you're dead, this is all true.
If you're dead, stay dead. If you're alive, send us a solicitor's letter. But he sets up. He's a fantasist, really, and he sets up the National Socialist Irish Workers' Party. And he makes a bit of money for himself. This is in like the 1960s. In England, or in Britain, the Race Relations Act has come into play. So suddenly there's kind of like hate speech laws, and they can't find printers to print their material. And some of these laws are coming into effect in Germany and places. So this guy has like a cottage industry printing racist pamphlets and stickers in Dublin, shipping them abroad, and basically coining it in. But it's funny because despite being the National Socialist Irish Workers' Party, it never had more than about 24 members, and a good half of them were not Irish. So you had guys like Alf Day, who was an English fascist, who would be a member of Mosley's British Union of Fascists. And now this is where I'm going to mangle the pronunciation. You had Joseph Musche, a Dutch veteran of the Waffen-SS. And so you had a few, even Otto Skorzeny was actually living in Ireland for a number of years.
Really?
And I don't think he was in contact with Yaki when he was here, but he was kind of a high society figure. He used to turn up at horse racing events and things. But anyway, this group, the Irish Nazi Party, basically, they sent threatening letters to Black and Asian immigrants, also to like left-wing and Irish Republican TDs, like sending them death threats. And it's like, these guys are associated with the IRA, maybe not the cleverest thing to do. But there's also, like, there's a small Jewish community, it's still there in Dublin. And there's a series of like attacks on Jewish-owned bakeries and stuff. And in the 1970s, like there's protests about social issues like parks and stuff, and this guy would just rock up the protest and go, I'm here to support you, with his swastikas and everything. And the Sinn Féin or the Labour Party people who were there would just beat the shit out of him and say, fuck away from us, like, we want nothing to do with you. And some of them actually turned up at like I think they had connections to George Lincoln Rockwell. They certainly used to write to him, but it was kind of complaining that we're being beaten up all the time. This guy Burns, I think as well, again, there's allegations that he may have been up to criminal activity. I'll put it that way, just in case it's still alive.
Gotcha. Tenepod bingo.
Were they the group that was also in contact with James Mason?
Yeah, I think they wrote to basically a lot of the ANP guys, and were trying to get... they were kept complaining that they were being beaten up and stabbed, and kept complaining that the movement was small. And I think their real aim there was to try and get money out of them. Now, when George Lincoln Rockwell goes over to meet Colin Jordan at one of these spearhead training camps in England, he was banned from entering Britain. But Ireland and Britain have a common travel area, so you don't need like to show your passport if you get like the ferry from Ireland over to Wales and get the train down to London. So they may have been involved in helping Rockwell on that end of things, like he flew to Ireland and then got the ferry over. But I think their last public outing was in the late 70s or early 80s, and there was a protest outside the South African embassy. and it was an anti-apartheid protest, and these guys turned up and counter-protested out across the street, and they were like dressed like, like Hollywood pantomime Nazis in the style of the ANP.
He called himself Commander Byrne, right?
Yeah.
Commander
Byrne,
Rockwell.
Yes. Yeah. And basically, a number of guys who were there were, again, left-wing and Irish Republican. A number of the young guys were saying, fuck it, we're going to go across the road and kick their heads in. And some of the older guys, possibly IRA, said, no. You do that, the cops are here. They'll catch you. That'll be the story in the press. We beat them up, not what's happening in South Africa. Leave it and watch them when they pack up. So the anti-apartheid guys finish their protest. The Nazis head off, and a small little group breaks away and follows them and beats the shit out of them. And they're just kind of rolling up their sleeves rolling down their sleeves after they're finished. They turn the corner and they meet two of the Garda, two Irish police, and they're kind of fucking ready to just put their hands up and get the handcuffs put on. And the police go, fair play to you, lads. Just wave them on. But that group again fell apart in the 1980s because you had, again, I think, allegedly Burns dies at the time. Nobody's ever been able to prove what happens to the guy, but the group splintered into little tiny factions.
Mm-hmm. Maybe William Luther Pierce had him killed too.
Who knows? Did you want to talk about the national movement as well? Those guys
I was
you had
just about to ask you about the national movement, and I also don't want to forget to talk about the blue shirts, because we have a shirt collection going on here, and I think we really need to mention O'Duffy before we leave.
Which is, blue shirts is probably the thing we should start at the show. So I don't know.
It's true. It's like timeline-wise.
Who's editing this?
Time.
Fritz does the magic.
You guys are stuck on this linear idea of time. I learned from the Kali Yuga reading room that time is all about cycles, and I'm just trying to get us to the golden age.
Okay.
Historian and archaeologist here. Chronology, and context. That's all.
Yeah.
Anyway, so what do you want to start with, the blue shirts or the national movement?
Well, okay.
They're kind of linked. If we start,
Well, then let's start with the blue shirts and link them all up to the old national movement later on.
Okay, cool. So the first fascist groups to emerge in Ireland are really either Italian fascist immigrants in the 20s or British loyalists who are kind of on this imperialist vibe, and they regard Irish republicanism as a Jewish conspiracy and so on. Really, we don't see a kind of nativist Irish fascist Green Catholic group emerge until the late 20s, early 30s. And they operate under various names, but they're the most commonly known as the Blue Shirts. And they eventually merged with a number of other groups to found a political party, which is still going, called Fine Gael, which means the kin group of the Gael, of the Irish. Now, in fairness, those two groups did split apart pretty quickly again, because the Blue Shirts became such an embarrassment. The leading government party in Ireland at the moment is Fine Gael, but it's not like the Swedish Democrats. Like our current Taoiseach Prime Minister is of mixed Indian Irish heritage and is openly gay. So they've dropped a lot of their really hardcore fascist and racist politics. But what you get is this group, the Blue Shirts, is set up, and it's led by a guy called General Owen O'Duffy. Now, O'Duffy is one of these guys. He's part of that generation who fought the British. So he's regarded as a hero of the War of Independence. Now, he was in a fairly active area during the War of Independence. How competent the man was, I don't know. He had a lot of people shot as spies in his district, allegedly pro-British spies, like civilians. Some of them maybe on dubious evidence that can be argued. But like, one thing is he's missing his left index finger. And how he lost it was he would always tell people, this was a shootout with the British, the Black and Tans, and they were so close, they took off one of my fingers. He was actually drunkenly cleaning his gun, and he shot off one of his fingers.
That sounds right.
So that is, and drink is a big factor in Owen O'Duffy's life. Basically, he sets up this group, Republicans on kind of a centre-left basis under this guy, Eamon de Valera, are starting to enter Irish government. And he's commissioner of police when this is happening, and his plan is to actually set up, have a coup and to get the army on board and not let there be a peaceful transition of power in Ireland. These guys, De Valera and O'Duffy, take different sides in the Irish Civil War. To keep it simple, O'Duffy is willing to accept a compromise with the British and the partition of Ireland and Northern Ireland. De Valera is rejecting this. But eventually, 10 years after that Civil War, De Valera is about to come into power. O'Duffy wants to set up a coup. The coup doesn't happen because the army won't support him. And when De Valera gets in, unsurprisingly, he fires O'Duffy as commissioner, and O'Duffy then goes down the political road. And he sets up a group, and they become known as the Blue Shirts. They had various names: the League of Youth, the Army Comrades Association. And the reason why they picked blue is, I know people think of Ireland as green, but blue is a colour that is traditionally associated with St. Patrick. So that's why he picks blue
okay.
shirts.
I was going to go for...
Don't tell American Irish people that.
Yeah, I was thinking more of it was like a Catholic thing, like a Marian vibe, but that actually is a bit early. That would be early.
They do talk about that as well in their magazines and stuff. It's funny because the British Fascisti, one of the earlier fascist groups, a loyalist fascist group, had actually worn blue shirts as well as black shirts. But anyway, O'Duffy, anyway, in this group, what do they do? Well, a lot of what they do is street brawls with the IRA.
Okay.
And there is, on one occasion, they targeted a very famous IRA leader called Tom Barry down in Cork. And on one occasion, they targeted some of these men and beat them up as they were on their way home from a pub or a meeting or whatever. And the IRA took their vengeance on him. One blue shirt was pulled out of his house that night and was shot through the head. And another guy was beaten to death with a sledgehammer. And a third guy was just beaten to death with fists and boots. And the blue shirts then, they shot dead an IRA volunteer in Ennis in County Clare called James Lynn. That's in 1934. And for years, there's kind of running street violence between the far right and the blue shirts and the Irish Republicans and sometimes left-wing Republicans in the IRA. And it gets to the point where the blue shirts are burning down people's houses and they're, stockpiling arms. And thankfully what happens is O'Duffy is a complete incompetent. He's also, by the way, a closet homosexual. Despite preaching all this stuff about Catholic purity and masculinity. And it's not one of these guessing games where we think an Irish political figure was gay. I mean, people say, was Michael Collins gay, or was this guy gay, or was Shakespeare gay, or whatever. In the case of Owen O'Duffy, Micheál MacLeamore, who was one of his lovers, came out and said, "Oh yeah, sure, he used to come to bed with me," and he used to tell the story that O'Duffy would climb the stairs with him to his bedroom, and there'd be the picture of the Sacred Heart in the wall, and O'Duffy didn't want Jesus to see what was happening, so he turned the picture around.
Classic.
Oh, damn. Oh, this is why we need therapy for free.
Not only so do you have MacLeamore, who's his lover, talking about the relationship they have, you also have police files at the time monitoring this guy because he is a political extremist, saying the former Garda Commissioner, Owen O'Duffy, went to MacLeamore's house and stayed there overnight. So, you've got corroboration on that. That's proven. But O'Duffy, that's not generally known, but O'Duffy is a pretty fucking hard drinker and basically starts making speeches drunk and becomes an embarrassment, and blue shirt violence becomes an embarrassment to Fine Gael. So they actually dump him and get rid of him. The Fine Gael party has its own anti-O'Duffy wing of the blue shirts for a few years, and then they get rid of that. O'Duffy is in the political wilderness, and he says, I need to revive my political career. So his plan for doing it is the Spanish Civil War. So he decides to lead an Irish brigade to fight for Franco in the Spanish Civil War. And it's presented as a Catholic crusade against Bolshevism. And of course, when he arrives, he doesn't have enough men to make up a full unit. So they're put into a unit in support of Franco's Moorish legions. So this does not play very well. And the first time they're on their battlefield, they're not wearing blue shirts. They've changed their shirt to green at this time. Okay. And they march out onto the battlefield. They are heading for the enemy lines, and they meet another group of armed men who happen to be a fascist group from the Canary Islands.
Okay.
Neither side recognizes the other. Because
Sure.
O'Duffy's men are speaking English, the fascists think that they are like Irish guys in the international brigades.
Right.
And
Yeah.
O'Duffy's group, and they open fire on each other. And O'Duffy's group win that battle. I think they killed 12 of the Spanish fascists. So critical support to Owen O'Duffy for killing 12 fascists. At one stage, that's kind of the high point of their military career in Spain. A number of them shoot themselves accidentally.
Sure.
The Spanish are not happy with them because they just can't handle the local wine and they're going nuts at it. One of my favorite stories about the Blue Shirts is that there is a parade and the Spanish general is there to meet them. And one of the Irish guys is so drunk that he pukes down the collar of the general's shirt.
God.
They're in and out of the whorehouses, and the local priests are not happy about this at all. And eventually, Franco and company just go, get these guys the fuck out of here, and they're packed off back to Ireland. And they arrive kind of in disgrace. They're not welcomed back as heroes. They had gone out as heroes because by this time people know about the bombing of Madrid and stuff. And even when they arrive back into Dublin, they march in two separate groups, a pro-O'Duffy group and an anti-O'Duffy group. And O'Duffy's last kind of great hurrah is in 1943 when he contacts the German embassy, and the Spanish have a blue division who go to fight against Soviet Russia.
Yeah.
O'Duffy contacts the German embassy because, again, Ireland was neutral in World War II, and he says, I will organise a Green Legion for you. So this is sent back to Berlin, and they pick up the phone to Franco, and Franco is just like, no fucking way.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's now another group you wanted to talk about. There is a link between the Blue Shirts and them. Just let me bring this up.
Man, fascists killing fascists is definitely an underappreciated part of the fascist tradition that we try to set right on this show.
It's an art form of a particular
the joke
kind.
about O'Duffy's military unit is that they were the only military group in history that came back from war with more men than they left with. But it's not actually true. They did pick up some Irish guys outside, but a number of them died of dysentery and things. So there's a link between them and a later fascist group in the form of a guy called Stephen Coughlin. What you had was the IRA obviously did not get on with the Blue Shirts, and there was an attempt to assassinate Owen O'Duffy.
Sure.
O'Duffy goes to a meeting in Tralee in County Kerry, and there's thousands of IRA guys, Labour guys, anti-fascist guys there, and basically rioting breaks out. O'Duffy does manage to hold his meeting, but on the way in, somebody attacks him with a ballpoint hammer and hits him on the head 2 or 3 times.
Word.
He gets up, he has the meeting. The IRA are throwing grenades at it and trying to bomb the building and stuff, but he manages to get out in one piece. And he's driving through a place called Ballyseedy, which is very famous in Irish Civil War terms, but they think if they can kill O'Duffy here, they'll get revenge for stuff that happened in the Civil War and take out this fascist. So the IRA have machine guns and stuff set up, but they need to know what car Owen O'Duffy is travelling in. And there was a young IRA volunteer called Stephen Coughlin, and this would be about 1934, and Coughlin is given the job of getting the number plate of the car and relaying it to the guys in the ambush so they don't shoot up the wrong car.
Yeah.
And the official story was that Coughlin always had moral qualms about this because he was a good Catholic and he didn't think it was right to kill O'Duffy in this way. But Coughlin pops up again later in the history of Irish fascism because apart from bungling the attempt to assassinate O'Duffy, he joins the Irish Labour Party, and he is elected the Member of Parliament and also the Mayor of Limerick. There is a Maoist bookshop at that time in Limerick, which is regional, provincial city, which has the great title of the Little Red Bookshop, which I love. And this causes a moral panic and a moral outrage. And Stephen Coughlin, even though he's the Labour Party, he says, I'm not a communist, he leads the crusade against this. And he enlists the support he receives the support of a tiny neo-Nazi faction in Limerick called the National Movement. And they actually smash the windows of the shop. They fire gunshots at it. They succeed in closing it down. But when this disorder is condemned, Coughlin, as the mayor of Limerick, stands up and says, well, I remember when the Jews were run out of Limerick in 1904, and there was nothing wrong with that, and there's nothing wrong with running out communists as well. But this group, the National Movement, are active until the... let me just check my dates here. They're active... Let me see. They're active, and I think the 50s and up into the early 60s. And one of the most famous things is in January 1970, I think this is their high point, the Springboks, the South African rugby team, which of course was all white, travels to Britain and Ireland and does this rugby tour of matches. And they're staying in Bunratty, which is just over the Clare border from Limerick City, so a distance of maybe 10 miles or so. And outside Limerick is a great rugby city, and outside the hotel there's a group of anti-apartheid protesters picketing. And next thing, in the middle of the night, about 20 guys in neo-Nazi uniforms, like black trousers, black polo shirts, and like a swastika armband, but instead of the swastika in the center, there's a Celtic cross.
Yeah, of course.
And they basically just start beating the shit out of the anti-apartheid protesters, carrying signs like, we support white Christian South Africa, box yes, reds no, red thugs out. And that was probably the first occasion that uniformed fascists had actually marched in Ireland since the time of Owen O'Duffy. And again, the connection between them is this guy, Stephen Coughlin, who may have spared O'Duffy's life, because if he was really anti-Semitic and really anti-communist and was willing to work with Nazis, maybe he was sympathetic towards O'Duffy as well.
Yeah. I guess coming to the end now, despite y'all's objections to my artistic sense of temporality, I believe in temporal juxtaposition as a learning tool. But coming to the chronological end here, I think, if nothing else, we've definitely established that what's happened in Dublin last week is part of a larger history and doesn't come out of nowhere, but also a history that has met an enormous amount of resistance. And it should be said that most of the groups that you covered in this chapter you gave us were, like some of them lasted 2 days, so others a couple decades, but overall it seems like there's been a really strong, on the other side of that token, fascist networks in Ireland are expanding into, as all these groups do, transnational networks, specifically in other parts of Europe, also in the US. So you mentioned some connections between, for instance, so one of these groups, and they had invited some lady that turned out to be a Reichsbürger person to participate in some other events. I mean, there's like...
No, that we'll have to be careful on. We can talk about it. We just need to be careful in what we say.
Sure.
So there's a number of small far-right political parties in Ireland at the moment. And the best thing about them is that they all hate each other. Sure. And they have refused to cooperate with each other to a large extent, which means they remain small and irrelevant. None of them have ever gotten above 2% in the Irish vote. But then again, we can't be complacent, because I think the first time the Nazis stood for election, they got 2% of the vote, and political things can change very quickly. In 2020, there was a woman called Birgit Malsack-Winkelmann, who was an AfD member of the Bundestag and a member of the Alternative for Deutschland party. And in 2020, she visited one of these parties, these kind of micro-Irish nationalist, Irish patriot parties in Ireland. And she posed with members of the party. She addressed their rallies, and they took selfies with her and stuff like that. And the following year, or in 2022, she was arrested on suspicion of terrorist offences for her alleged role in plotting an armed group to overthrow the German government and to install a German aristocrat, a guy called Heinrich Prinz Rus zu Großschritt, the 13th. Again, my Deutsch is nicht so good, aber mein Gälisch sie fließen.
I think you nailed it.
But they attempt to install this guy as the new Kaiser. So it's like the far-right Reichsbürger conspiracy, free man of the land movement. So she's been over here, and there's some connections there. Now, I do have to say, for legal reasons, that the political party that invited her claimed that they had no knowledge of her activities in plotting this, and that this particular woman, Birgit Malsack-Winkemann, has not been convicted of any crime and has the presumption of being innocent until proved guilty. I'm just reporting the fact that she has been alleged to be part of this crime and turned up in Ireland. If you don't have the First Amendment, you have to make statements like that.
Yeah, no, we at TENEPOD have always just taken the word of fascists, for at their word. They're very honest people, would never mislead us in any way.
Interestingly, the political party wouldn't be very fashy. They're more kind of on the very conservative, Europhobic. Some of their stuff I would class as, they're not fans of LGBT and stuff. It's more like Catholic conservatism and
maybe like illiberalism in the Orban Viktor sense kind of thing.
I don't know enough about Viktor Orban.
He's some fascist. Yeah,
there are members of one Irish group who actually are in Hungary at the moment. You've also had attempts by, I've seen podcasts by Irish far-right guys where you have some members of these micro parties coming on, and there's guys like Mark Collette, who's like this English former BNP youth leader. And again, these guys are, pretty loyalist and have come out with some pretty shocking stuff and, been accused of Holocaust denial and things. And they're advising the Irish of how to plan their protests and how to organize and what tactics to use. So it's scary stuff. And I think there certainly has been a bit of complacency up to now on the part of the police and the government in particular, thinking these people are just fringe nut jobs. They're not getting electoral traction. They're going to go away. But also on the part of some Irish trade unions just said, okay, well, we'll organize a big rally. And that will, and there was this huge rally, I think close to 100,000 people in Dublin against fascism and hate and so on. But rallies like that alone aren't going to solve the problem. I think what's happening in Ireland now is like what we saw in Britain with the National Front in the 70s and the 80s. Okay. These guys are going to be around for 10 years before they break up or are gotten rid of. And even then, little groups will come back. Sure. And I think my final would be there are a lot of political problems in Ireland at the moment. There is a lack of housing. There's a lack of medical care. Our schools are underfunded. The class sizes are too big. The cost of living is going up. But the people who are responsible for all of that are not the immigrants or the refugees from Ukraine. It is the Irish politicians who have fucked it up. And if you're a young, disenfranchised person and you're pissed off about that, get active in a regular political party and criticize the politicians, engage in politics, not, street thuggery and setting shit on fire and attacking people whose lives is traumatic enough after leaving, a fucking war zone. And basically the mainstream Irish politicians who are running the country, they're the people responsible for the economic situation, the housing situation, and the mess we see around us, not somebody who arrived from Ukraine last year fleeing a war.
Right.
All right. Well, thanks a lot for being here. Really, this was great for us. Ireland's been a blind spot. I hope you'll come on again to talk to me about Father Fahey when we get back to our American arc.
Yeah, we didn't even get to your Traddy
No, it's
Cathy
okay.
stuff.
We'll come back.
You love so much.
There's sediment contests. There's all sorts of people.
No, we have a lot to talk about. This is just our introduction here, I think, to the scene. So thanks a lot, Pádraig. And where can people find your books, your writings? Are you online anywhere?
No, I'm not really.
Smart
I'm
man.
not on Twitter. I don't have a Substack or anything. if you Google, if you put in the show links, my name, if people Google my name, they'll come up with my books on Irish history.
Yeah.
This is my first time writing specifically about the far right. I'm actually going to do something strange and plug somebody else's book if people want to know about Irish politics. If you want to know about the modern politics and the far right and the kind of online conspiracies, there's Web of Lies by Aoife Gallagher.
Aoife Gallagher. And
that's a great book on kind of QAnon and so on in Ireland. If you want to know about the Loyalist background, there's Fascism and Constitutional Conflict, the British Extreme Right and Ulster in the 20th Century. That's by James Laughlin. It's a great book, but it's an academic book. It's published by Limerick University or Liverpool University Press, so that's going to cost more. There is a book called Architects of the Resurrection. I think it's by Murray. And that's where you'll get the history of Altri na Hasairiga, Gerard O'Quinnagon's Irish-speaking fascist group. And my own book will be out when I find a publisher for it.
Oh, okay.
But I do have a book, if you like Irish history, I do have a book coming out in February, and it's called The Disappeared, Forced Disappearances in Ireland, 1798 to 1998. And that's about the 200-year-old tradition of Irish Republicans and the British Army killing people as a result of political conflict and then burying their bodies in secret in bogs all over Ireland. So if fascism isn't grim enough for you and you want some hidden bodies, not quite on the scale of Bosnia and places, but, but disappearing bodies has been part of our history too.
Man,
fantastic.
Been having a lot of bogs on the show lately.
It's true, yeah. We just talked about Finland. There's some bogs there.
Their bogs are frozen, ours are thawed.
Yeah.
That is such a weird brag. That's a very, very Northern European
That's all right. There's what we thought at some point soon
fucking
anyway.
Finnish bogs suck. Yeah, you need some Irish peat in there. All right, guys. This was great. I had a great time.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you so much. It was great.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, Pádraig.
And we'll get on we'll get on again to commiserate about growing up Catholic.
Some other time. I tell you the story of how I was excommunicated sometime.
Hey, I got one too.
Oh, shit.
I got one too. All right, stay tuned, listeners, for next time, where we learn how everybody gets excommunicated. Thanks a lot. Later.
Right.
Okay. Good luck.
Cheers.
Bye.
Hey there, Fritz here from The Empire Never Ended. This has been one of our weekly free episodes for free people. But for premium people, we also have weekly premium episodes, which you can get at patreon.com/tenepod, TENEPOD, and also follow our various social media things in the show description there. Like and subscribe them. Follow them. Like and follow and subscribe. Follow them. Do it.